Hey, yeah, just want to show you guys how to remove and replace the front axle of this front-wheel drive 1987 Toyota Corolla FX-16 GT-S, known as the AE82.
Okay, so after inspecting underneath the car, I found the front left side front-wheel drive axle worn out on both CV joints. And as you can see, the inner CV joints connected to the transmissions, there's a lot of grease just seeping out, as well having a transmission leak with a bad seal. Here, as you can see, there's a split in the outer CV boot. And because of lack of lubrication, the axle is now making this clunking noise whenever the wheels are turned during a low speed. Okay, so first thing is to use a lift jack, place it underneath the subframe, and slowly lift up the car. Then place the jack stand under the back of the control arms bracket. And as you slowly lower it, make sure both jack stands are flat to the ground and the car is rest evenly. Okay, remove the front wheel. I highly recommend using air tools to make the job easier and much more quicker. To get to the 30mm axle nut, you need to remove the cotter pin and the axle nut crown cap. I will use a die cutter to bend the leg straight, and eventually we'll reuse it because it's still in good shape. After the cap is removed, use a 30mm socket with an impact air gun, then remove the axle nut. Remove the 6 12mm nuts off the inner CV joint connected to the inboard stud axle. Okay, so be aware that there's an alignment camber indicator set by the alignment shop before disconnecting the strut and steering knuckle. I will mark it first just to make sure so I don't forget. Then begin to remove the two 19mm nuts and bolts. As you can see, there is no clearance in order to remove the lower bolt. So I ended up losing the brake caliper by removing the top 12mm long bolt. Then only loose the bottom 12mm bolt and slightly push out the caliper without straining the brake line. Use a rubber mallet and slowly tap in the outer CV joint when there should be plenty of clearance. Okay, don't forget to use the lift jack to support the lower control arm and the brake line from hanging. Due to a lack of lubrications, contamination such as dirt and water would then get inside the cracked boot and rust up the inner part of the joint, and that will produce a loud, awful clunking noise while the wheels are turning and rolling at the same time. The newly rebuilt unit should feel stiff on both sides, and as you can see in the inner part of the axle, it's got a plate and a gasket that just holds the grease. By neglecting to replace the axles from time to time, the joints will eventually dry up and worn out, and eventually will break, which will cause an uncontrollable steering, and it can be very, very hazardous to other drivers, pedestrians, and to yourself. In order to remove the transaxle seal, the inboard stub axle needs to be removed, as I found this shift fork from another C50 transmission very handy. Place it behind the stub axle. Make sure it doesn't hit the seal cover behind the stub axle, and lightly pound it out. Make sure an oil pan is ready to catch some of the old fluid. Now the seal is exposed. I used a special seal removal tool from Harbor Freight to push it out. So again, make sure the new part is the same as the old one, because both sides of the transaxle seals are actually different when it comes to the outer diameter size. Before installing the seal, you want to lube the oil seals lip with a bit of grease or transmission oil, then install the seal evenly by lightly tapping the rubber face with an extension. Next, I use the oil seal installer tool that I purchased at Harbor Freight, and just take some time to lightly push in the seal evenly until it's properly seated. Double check the seated oil seal, as it will be the only time to be visible. After that, install the inboard stub axle and hit the center to drive it in. It will make a different sound when it's all the way in. Make sure to check the seal cover behind the inboard stub axle from hitting the new oil seal, and also for excessive shaft play movements. Okay, notice that I've also drained the rest of the tranny fluid, as it is recommended to be replaced every 25 to 30,000 miles under routine maintenance. Okay, so just before I install the axle, I would add a little bit of anti-seize onto the splines and threads for easier future removal. Instead of loosening the transmission fill bolt underneath the car, I would undo the 14mm shifting bolt on top of the transmission that I painted yellow. Make sure that the shifter is in neutral before removing the bolt. I would then use an empty transmission fluid bottle and use it as a funnel. Insert through the hole, then pour 2.7 quarts of 7590 or 8090 rated GL4 transmission fluid, recommended by the Toyota Service Manual or TSM. Once the seal is leak free, don't forget to lubricate the seal on the back of the steering knuckle that's not shown in this video. First, install the inner end to the inner bore stub and finger tight all 6 12mm retainer nuts. Insert the outboard side to the shaft into the axle hub and make sure both CV boots are not twisted. Reinstall the two 19mm bolts and nuts to reconnect the strut to the steering knuckle and torque them on 47 foot-pound. Then torque the 12mm retainer nuts to 27 foot-pound per the TSM. Again, watch for the camber alignment indicator on the upper 19mm bolt on the strut. Reinstall the washer and torque the axle bearing nut up to 137 foot-pound. Be sure to use a new cotter pin on the lock nut cap if required. I then double check for everything by making sure nothing is left behind. Okay, from this point, I can now perform a quick test by turning on the car and let down first gear to check the newly rebuilt CV axle that it's in good working condition. I would not recommend to anyone, but if you think you can, then just make sure that the car is sitting evenly on jack stands. Use the lift jack for extra support, make sure the e-brake is on, and use wheel chock for the rear tires. This test can be fatal if done recklessly, so take your time, double check, because safety is no accident. Well, thanks for watching my first video on how to remove and replace the driver's side CV axle on my 1987 Toyota Corolla FX-16 GT-S, and as well that applies to other front-wheel drive Toyota cars. And just want to say good luck.